Hi, I'm Victor, the main organizer of the Full Stack Flutter conference. On this channel, we publish the best talks from the conference every week throughout the year, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. I'm also the founder of Serverpod, so if you want to build your backend in Dart, make sure to check that out. Here's Reid. Leigha used to work at the Flutter team at Google. Now she's the head of product at FlutterFlow. In this talk, we'll learn about what's new in FlutterFlow, so let's dive in.
Hi everyone, I'm Leigha and I lead product and developer relations over at FlutterFlow. And today I'm going to be talking to you about what's new in FlutterFlow. So FlutterFlow's mission is to help the world build great products. And if we think about how that mission plays into our product vision, we can really break it down into our value proposition for our two main groups of users. First, we have our developers. And when it comes to developers using FlutterFlow, our main goal is to help make them faster. On the other hand, we have a group of not so technical folks, people like entrepreneurs or designers who have big ideas but maybe don't have the technical skills or experience to bring those ideas to life. FlutterFlow lowers the barrier to entry for app development and allows anyone to build whatever they can dream up. And when it comes to the messaging of the FlutterFlow tool itself, I like to make sure that we don't categorize FlutterFlow as a low-code tool. Low-code tool inherently feels like you're making some sacrifice when it comes to certain features that you want to build into your app or the quality of the app that's produced. Instead, we like to think about FlutterFlow as a visual development environment, where you can do all the same sorts of things that you would do in an integrated development environment like VS Code, but now with the added benefit of working in this user interface where it makes sense. So I want to talk a little bit about our product strategy and how do we actually live up to this mission. Well, when it comes to making developers faster, like I said, it's our goal to make sure that we aren't asking you to sacrifice on features in your app or the quality of the app that's generated from FlutterFlow. And the way we're trying to bring this vision to life is in two main strategic areas. The first one is taking a look at software development best practices in traditional Flutter or Dart workflows and bringing those best practices into the FlutterFlow application itself. Then we need to go one step further. We don't just want to recreate another IDE. Instead, we want to make it a much more enjoyable experience and make those developers faster, like I mentioned before. So here we're focusing on simplifying tasks that are really hard in a text-based world and making it much easier through visual cues. On the not so technical user side, we of course want to give these users superpowers, like I mentioned earlier. But we want to make sure that we're building their foundational knowledge. We think we're still at the point in app development where we need these folks to make conscious decisions about how their app is architected so that it's performant and doesn't have any issues when it comes to the app consumers. So we're really trying to build out that foundational knowledge in a way that's easy to consume if you don't have technical experience. So we're educating our users on best practices for front-end development, and we're making sure that we keep an intuitive and easy-to-use interface as we start to add more advanced software development features. So before I go into our roadmap and how we're going to live up to this vision, I want to just give you a little idea of how FlutterFlow works today. So FlutterFlow is, of course, a visual development environment. You spend most of your time on this builder interface, which I'll give a demo of in just a second. But changes that you make to your app in this builder get stored in an intermediary protobuf format. So we basically have this intermediary representation of your entire app that you're building. And this representation is fed into our backend code generation tool, which of course generates the Flutter app code. And as you're building in FlutterFlow, you always have the option to download or export your code so that you fully own your IP. And our goal is to make sure that the Flutter code that's generated is easy to read, to understand, to fork, and work off of if you choose to do so. So when it comes to building a FlutterFlow app, you're really just building a Flutter app under the hood. So it's good to remember what a Flutter app consists of. And we all know that everything in Flutter is made up of widgets. So when you're building an app in Flutter, you start with a widget that represents your app. In this case, we could just call it My App. And within the app, you have a collection of pages, which are themselves each individual widgets. Pages are made up of different layout widgets like columns or rows. And within those layout widgets, they have children that are atomic widgets like button and text elements. And when it comes to FlutterFlow, we take a really similar approach. We're thinking in terms of apps, pages, layouts, atomic widgets, and of course, if you're writing this app by hand, your code is all influenced by theme and style constants. So properties of these widgets are set based on those theme constants like text styles and colors and all that good stuff. And you always have the option to create your own custom widget. These might be composed from those atomic widgets that we mentioned. So think like cards and dialogues that you're building by composing individual widgets together. Or it might be a really custom thing, like you're using custom paint and really going low level into how pixels are painted on the screen. And like I said, we think about FlutterFlow apps in the same types of terminology. So in FlutterFlow, you start with a project, and a project represents a single app. Within your project, you create pages, and those pages are made up of widgets. So just like a widget page in your app code that you would write by hand, a FlutterFlow page has its own widget tree where you can add layout widgets, form elements, atomic widgets, and these are all kind of built-in widgets that mostly come directly from the Flutter framework. And just like if you are writing this app by hand, you can create custom widgets. In FlutterFlow, there are two main types of custom widgets. Components, which are widgets that you compose from those built-in widgets that we have available, or totally custom widgets that you write using dark code. So if something isn't available in the FlutterFlow platform, you can always drop down to code and create that custom widget by hand. So now let's jump into the FlutterFlow platform and just go through a very quick demo. So now I just want to go through a really quick demo of the FlutterFlow platform, but we have lots of great resources on YouTube and in our documentation to help explain all these concepts even further. So like I mentioned before, a FlutterFlow project represents a single app. And right now I'm in this e-commerce flow project. I spend most of my time in this widget tree page, which is broken up into a couple of different sections. Over here, I can see all the pages or components that I have in my app. And right now I've selected the product list page. So a page in FlutterFlow is just a widget that has a scaffold, and we automatically take care of routing for different pages for you. You can see the route settings of this page right here. And different widgets or pages have different properties and configurations that we can set on the right-hand side. So you can see over here I've selected my product list page, so I see all the properties specific to this page. Like, for example, background color, whether or not it should respect safe area. And for certain properties, we can connect them to dynamic values or variables. And these can also pull from things that are set in our theme, which comes into play right here, where I can set colors and text styles and so on. For a page, I also have the option to add any input parameters or state variables. So in this case, I have a search string state variable that is of type string, and that is simply used to contain the value that my user inputs into this text field right here. We also have the ability to create animations, to connect to a backend query, or to specify actions, which are essentially just functions that would run in response to a trigger. So over here in my widget tree, since a page is itself just a widget, it has a bunch of widgets that it might return in the build method. And those widgets are specified in the widget tree right here. So we have different layout widgets like columns or lists, and we can add widgets to this widget tree just by clicking this button here, searching for the widget we need and adding it. And of course, we can drag and drop them into the proper place if we want to rearrange things. One thing you'll notice is this little blue diamond. So I have this card right here, and if I head over to this right-hand side, I can click Edit this component. So this little diamond means that this is a reusable component that I've created. And components are, of course, themselves widgets. They have their own widget tree where they can be composed of layout, form, atomic widgets as well. So here I've just created this card that I can reuse in multiple places, like how it's reused in multiple places in this page. Besides the widget tree, I have the option to connect database, create custom classes or data types like enums and structs, manage state across my entire app or add constants, connect to different API calls, add media assets, write custom code in the form of functions like business logic or widgets, even create backend cloud functions or tests that are going to run as part of a continuous integration process. So that's a quick overview. Now back over to the slides. Okay, so that was a little bit about the FlutterFlow product today, but let's talk about some recent releases and also what we're working on. So a few months back, I published a blog that covered our roadmap, and it really broke things down into these high-level themes that we're focusing on. And these themes are app architecture, testing and debugging, collaboration, and then across the board, we're focusing on user experience. So let's talk about each one of these in more detail. The first is app architecture, and our goal here is really to promote software development best practices inside the FlutterFlow application. We're primarily focusing on things like encapsulation and reusability, and our goal here is to make sure that if you're following FlutterFlow best practices, the generated code will also follow Flutter and Dart best practices. So a couple of features that we recently launched in this area. A few months back, we launched parameters in callbacks. So I just showed how you can create a page and a component inside of FlutterFlow. And components, of course, have input parameters. One type of input parameter is a callback action, which is essentially a function that you pass in as an input parameter. So an example of where this could be really useful is if you want a component, like something that happens inside of a component, to actually update a page state variable. So in this example, let's say that I want page state variables to track what the user has specified for product, like the size of a product, the color, or the quantity. I can pass in a callback action or function that's going to update the page state variable. And this callback can itself take input parameters like the variable name or type or the value that it needs to update to. And in the generated code, we can see it looks just like what we would write by hand. So we have this drop-down widget, and when the value is changed, so on change, that property is just a callback function. And you can see we're setting state and using the drop-down value, all that good stuff. So that was callbacks and parameters in callbacks. We've also recently launched the ability to run actions in parallel. And similarly to what I just described, actions are essentially functions, and they usually run in response to a trigger. So parallel actions allow you to execute multiple tasks simultaneously, as opposed to waiting for the previous one to complete before you can start the next one. And this is especially useful for things like long-running database queries. So those were a couple of things we recently launched, but of course we know that we still have a lot we need to do in this area. So a few projects that we're working on now. The first one is breaking up app state into modular classes. So if you use FlutterFlow today, you'll notice that the app state variables that you add are all stored in this kind of one big mega class. And we're not being super intelligent about how we're watching that class for updates. So this is something we're actively working on. We're also working towards making components just more powerful. We know that creating components is a great way to make your widget and UI code more reusable throughout your FlutterFlow app. But there are some limitations on components today, so we're quickly working on resolving those so that you can make a component out of anything in your widget tree. So that was app architecture. Now over to testing and debugging. And our goal here is pretty self-explanatory. It's to make it easy for users to run, test, and troubleshoot their application. One feature that we recently launched in this area is called Local Run, and I'm super excited about it. Local Run gives you the ability to run your FlutterFlow app on a connected device when you're in the desktop app. So we have a FlutterFlow desktop app for both Windows and Mac. Of course, thank you, Flutter, which allows us to easily deploy to multiple platforms at once. But from one of those desktop apps, when you go to test or run your application in that top right-hand corner, you'll be able to select devices that are connected to your computer. And this includes physical phones that are connected through wireless debugging. For example, your iPhone connected to Xcode through Wi-Fi. Besides just running your app on a locally connected device, FlutterFlow manages its own version of the Flutter tool, so you don't need to worry about managing different versions or dependencies. And you can do things like access the logs or open the generated code to see what's going on under the hood. So that's where we spent a lot of our time recently when it comes to testing and debugging. Now we're working on a couple of new upcoming projects. So the first one is debugging tools for when you're running or testing your app, which I think will help make a huge difference, and I'm super excited. Stay tuned for more updates on this feature coming in the next few weeks. And we're also working towards just making the builder preview more powerful, so you get real-time previews as you're building your app. So that was testing and debugging. Another theme we're focusing on is collaboration. And our goal here is to support modular app development, which means that if you're working on a huge app across a huge team, maybe you want to divide and conquer and work on individual parts of that app in different projects. We also want to make sure we have comprehensive access management and really robust version control. So back in the fall, we launched branching, and we've since made a ton of branching improvements in the product. We've just overall improved the reliability of branching. We've improved some of the user experience with merge conflicts and added smaller features like the ability to rename branches. And while this is a great start, we know we have some more work to do in this area as well. We're heavily investing in branching and version control, and we have lots of improvements that are coming out over the next couple of weeks and months, which will make a huge difference in this area. We're also thinking more holistically about how we can make it easy to share different classes between FlutterFlow projects. So stay tuned for more details on that soon. The next theme that I want to talk through is user experience. And I talk about user experience as going across the board because we know that having a great user experience is so foundational to those value propositions that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. So our goal here is really to simplify tasks by reducing any clicks in the platform so that you can move really quickly. You never have to take your hand off the keyboard, and you can navigate throughout the platform super easily. We also know we need to ensure visual consistency. So you build up that muscle memory and know just where you need to look for certain things in the platform. And of course, this wouldn't be a technical talk in 2024 if I didn't mention AI somewhere. So we're very focused on incorporating AI where possible and where we know it'll make a big difference in user productivity. So we've been making lots of small UX improvements. A couple of features that are great to mention right here is the ability to change the canvas background color, which is really important when you're making components that maybe don't have a container or something that fills the background, and you want to see how it would look on different page colors. We've also improved our color picker to just make it easier to work with and make it faster for you to choose or remove colors. And another feature that I love is the ability to create a data type class straight from a JSON. So you can think about a data type as kind of like a struct with fields and data types that are specified for each one of those fields. Now we'll automatically create one of those for you based on the JSON sample. And the best part is this even works for heavily nested JSON objects. So it's a great time saver for FlutterFlow users. And of course, we have lots of projects planned for the user experience theme. One core thing we're working on right now is just improving the performance of the FlutterFlow application itself. Another thing we're working on is just making it easier to switch between code and a GUI interface. We know that sometimes it's going to be easier and faster to work in a user interface, but a lot of times people feel more comfortable writing code as well. So sometimes business logic will be easier just to handle by writing code, and we want to make it really easy for users to seamlessly switch between these two experiences in the FlutterFlow platform. And of course, like I mentioned before, we're really focused on integrating AI where we know it'll make users way more productive. So thank you so much for joining my talk. That was a little bit about FlutterFlow and what we have planned. But of course, stay tuned for more updates. The best place to go to see updates is the FlutterFlow community, and you'll see us post our release notes there. So thanks so much, and see you all around.